This is Kristin.
And I'm Steve, and you were listening to Cycling Together, a show all about bikes, riding, and riding together.
And we're on our new schedule every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks, yep.
Yeah, I think we'll do that through at least the summer. You're in your busiest time. We're busy every weekend. So I think it is not unreasonable
It is.
for
This
us
is
to back this off to every other week.
Yep, this is the peak time for service at the shop. So it is absolutely
And events.
crazy.
Rides are starting. The clinics are starting, the events are starting, everything's starting. So weekends are going to get really full. That's when we record. So
Right. Every 2 weeks.
Every
And if
2
we have more to
weeks.
say, we'll do an extra.
we feel so inspired.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So we had a big announcement this week.
Yes, right. Yeah. And a good announcement for the shop.
It was a great announcement for the shop. We have partnered with Allied Cycle Works to bring in that brand to the shop, primarily their mountain bike and their gravel bikes.
Right.
So
They also have a all-road bike and a pure road bike.
Right. We talked about it a little bit in our intro video, but why don't you tell me a little bit about Allied Cycle Works?
So Allied is based out of Bentonville, Arkansas.
They started in what, 2016?
It was 2015 or 2016. Yes,
Yeah.
that's about right.
Yep. So new
And-
brand.
Yes, a newish brand, right?
This is a little bit into kind of behind the scenes of a bike shop. We wanted to bring in a new brand.
Yes.
We don't necessarily, especially with everything that's going on in the world economically, we didn't necessarily want to bring on a brand, at least right this second, that required a big
Yeah, a
purchase.
traditional brand that says, okay, please buy thousands upon thousands of dollars of inventory and put them on your floor and so forth.
Right,
So
so-
Allied really aligns with the way we do a lot of business, and in terms of their very customizable bikes. And so you can get everything from a full bicycle with a certain set of parts that you want. They offer different component groups, or you can get right down to the frame. And even on their BC40 frame, if you have your own shocks or you have something special in mind and you just want bare frame without even the shocks, you can get that.
You can get that. This is not silly, because people will say to me, oh, thinking about the color, I like the color. I want to like the color. Does that seem silly? And I always say, no, that does not seem silly. You should love your bike. You should look at your bike and have it make your heart go pitter patter. And one of the nice things about Allied is because they're painted as they're ordered, they offer a ton of in-stock colors.
Yes.
So you can really pick the color that you like,
Yep.
or you can have a fully custom color.
Correct,
If you
yeah.
have a signature color or a corporate color or something like that, which I also think speaks to what's been happening at the shop, even with our brand Ruckus, is that we have a lot of people who like to just customize everything. These are big investments. They're toy, but they're also toys, and you want to have some fun. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, the
And-
majority of Ruckus customers ordered a custom color.
Yep.
And everybody there just really liked the fact that they weren't bound to particular parts. So
Carbon
or they didn't in a lot of cases people aren't making a lot of changes on a bike, but you know, if you get a stock bike, many times people are like, well, these are not really the tires that I wanted. So they get new
Right.
tires, so there's that expense.
Yeah.
And they switch out the saddle.
Yep.
And maybe they want thicker handlebar tape. So there's things going on that a lot of times you would get up front with more of this customization.
Right. And we actually first heard, well, I'll put me. I first heard of Allied a couple of years ago when Leah Davison signed on with them as an athlete. She has this beautiful Pride themed bicycle that they made for her. So I had it on my radar a little bit. I'm sure you knew about it before I knew about it. But then Kate Courtney, who we
Left
were following
because of Scott.
Right, because of Scott, because we're a Scott dealer.
Right.
So we had followed Kate's career, and then she left Scott.
Formed her own
team.
And her bike sponsor is Allied.
Yeah, so something about that final piece when we started to talk about what could be a brand we could bring in that made me in particular very happy. Kate's set up a nonprofit that is, as I understand it, to get more kids on mountain bikes, more girls on mountain bikes. So her racing is in support of that also. So I'm really excited about it. And that means that I got a new bike.
It does.
It does. Obviously, I got the bike because we're selling Allied.
Right.
But also, I wouldn't get the bike if it's not the right bike for me. I'm not that good of a mountain biker. I need to ride the right bike for me. So I want to start with you explaining to me the difference between down country and cross country. And my other question in that is down country a newer term?
Okay. We
That's my
yes.
question.
That
I have
is
two questions.
That is a great question.
Thank you.
All of these different terms for mountain bikes generally revolve around their travel. So cross country was always this sort of 100 millimeters of travel.
Okay.
And then you kind of came into like these you have all mountain, and which is
Okay. See, I'm feeling better because
Yep.
I feel like all of these terms keep popping up, and I basically was like, I thought it was cross country or not cross country. Or enduro.
and so you're going to hear all mountain, you're going to hear all trail. Both of those are in these 130, 140, 150 range.
Okay.
You get to enduro, which is 160, 170, 180, and then you have downhill, which is greater than that in the 200s.
Okay.
Okay. So down country is a newer term. And it evolved basically as a cross country bike that probably has a little more travel and is designed to be a little bit more downhill focused. Like it has more rough and tumble capability hitting rough downhill trails. Okay.
Okay.
But here's the thing: not down country the term has come in,
Yes.
and now I think the term is just sort of going out. And
I just learned the term.
you just learned it, and forget it; it's gone. So, so cross country bikes in general have just become more capable. And what a cross country full suspension mountain bike, which was traditionally 100 millimeters of travel, front and rear.
Okay.
And in some cases, even a little less.
Yeah.
Those are now just bumping up. So a 120 millimeters of travel is now becoming very normal for a lot of cross-country race bikes.
Okay.
Okay? Because
Yep.
cross-country race courses have gotten a lot more difficult with technical features.
Okay.
Bigger jumps, bigger boulders, bigger rock gardens, all that type of stuff. And so to facilitate that for the racers, that they've been going up in travel.
Let me go back a couple. I want to actually track my progression. So when I got back into mountain biking, I got a black and blue Spark mountain bike.
Oh, yes. Yep, that's right. The black and blue one. I forgot about that one.
Right. And I soon upgraded to a different Spark, but they were both Sparks. My first two Scott mountain bikes were Sparks.
They were the non-RC. So there's an RC version, which is their race version.
Okay. But those were considered cross-country.
They were still considered cross-country bikes.
Okay. And then we were talking about this. I then moved to the Genius at the time, which was
I would call that all mountain.
all mountain. Okay. And that had more travel.
150 millimeters.
Had 150 millimeters. Yep. Okay. And so more recently, last year, I moved from the Genius to a Bold Lincoln, which is considered what?
Again, all mountain.
All mountain.
Yeah.
That had one.
Trail all mountain.
Okay. But we were talking about this yesterday when we were taking my new bike out, which is a cross-country, down-country
So
bike.
the Allied?
The new Allied is...
Right. So I would call it down country if you're going to use that current term because of its 120 travel. But as I said, we're sort of getting rid of down country.
Kind of back to cross-country.
And it confuses people a little bit.
A little bit.
The problem with saying cross country is that it's in a lot of riders' head that cross country right away means low travel race and not really a bike that can take the hits.
Is that what they're trying to differentiate? They're trying to take the person who says, I don't want a cross-country bike because that's too aggressive, not enough travel, too racy. But I don't want an all-mountain bike because that has too much travel, might be too heavy. So they came up with
downcountry.
Downcountry. Yeah. Okay. And the other thing we were talking about is that even though the Genius name is still around, they're still using it, obviously.
Yes.
My original Genius and the Genius as it is sold today are not the same.
Not at all. So your original Genius, which was that one was a 2018. That was almost a souped up version of the Spark.
Okay.
So very similar, identical frame design, just tweaked to give you more travel in the back, 150 versus 120, and then a matching 150 fork. Okay. And then it was built, the frame was still built very lightweight, and it was matched to usually Fox 34 forks.
Yep.
So right now, Fox doesn't even sell a Fox 34 with 150 millimeter travel. You have to go to a Fox 36, a bigger, heavier fork designed for bigger hits.
Right.
Right. And so and now the Fox 34 is used by cross-country racers.
Okay.
Right. So that bike was different than it is now because the current Genius is 150 in the back, 160 in the front, and that's now just sort of coming up to that almost. It is all mountain, but it's still now pushing the boundaries of enduro.
What I think is interesting about that is if you are someone who thinks, oh, I ride a Genius, keep in mind that model may have changed significantly in the 5 or 7 years since you last.
Yeah, there are some people who had a very top end old version Genius.
Yeah.
And in top spec that thing was 26.5 pounds, something like that.
Okay.
Right? And there's why is the new Genius even in top spec level heavier? And it's because everything on that bike was beefed up to take bigger hits.
Right.
The fork is now a Fox 36, right? And 160 millimeters of travel, not 150. The frame is designed to take more impacts and hits in terms of jump landings and so forth. And
the Bold Lincoln that I was riding last year, which I really liked, is I kept calling it a very capable feeling bike, which is an all mountain.
Yeah, let's
bike.
call it. Yeah, we'll call that a trail bike.
We'll call her a trail bike, and her travel is
135 rear.
Yep,
and 150 front. In your case, you were usually it's 140 on that particular model, but it's 150 for you.
So I was a little nervous, I will say, moving to the BC40, which is the Allied bike, because I knew I was going back to a down country because it's 120. Right.
Yep.
So I was a little worried, but what we talked about was I might not be using all that suspension.
Yeah, I knew you really were not going through all that suspension.
Yeah.
On the Bold.
Yep.
It would take a very big hit. I mean, as you know, the Bold just rides through some things just unbelievably smooth.
Beautiful bike. Yeah.
And you're light. So on a bigger hit, because you're a lighter rider, you're also not going to be pushing down on the bicycle as hard and forcing that use of that travel.
Right.
So between the lesser hits that you take than a more aggressive rider and your lighter weight, you were not using all that travel.
Yeah, but I was a little nervous about leaving the amount of travel I had on the Genius. That's why we went in part to the Bold that we did, because it was closer to what I thought I was used to. But I will say, after our first ride, I am cautiously optimistic about her. I'm having a lot of
you had
fun.
I
had a blast.
You say you're cautiously optimistic. You had a blast.
I had a blast.
You did. And I could tell And I could tell the difference on the climbs. You seemed a little faster on the climbs.
Okay.
Okay. And then I was watching you on the chunky descents, and you didn't seem to get phased by anything on that. So within your riding style, I was looking forward to see if you were going to be more hesitant on, and you weren't. You just floated through everything.
She rode very nicely. I'm having a lot of fun getting very involved in learning all the pieces, because I have generally gotten bikes almost out of the box. You might make a little tweak, but this one, because we are building her from the frame,
right?
I've enjoyed like learning about what parts were going on her, even talking about what the handlebars are going to be. What's the cockpit going to look like?
Right.
We talked about an integrated handlebar.
Not a lot of bikes have this, but Scots and Bolds do in many cases. And this is a one-piece carbon fiber bar and stem.
Right.
They're very, very sleek looking. They're very, very light, but you are completely limited to, obviously, they're a set stem length.
Yeah.
and a set, width, but the width is all you want. A lot of times you cut it down. But in terms of sweep and rise and so forth, that's all set. And if you wanted to make a change, you just have to get the whole assembly again, and it's very expensive.
Yeah, so I'm glad we're not doing that. It also means I can put the Garmin mount where I want it. I've had an integrated.
Yeah, I have one now, and I do love it.
Yeah, and I've had it on the last two bikes.
Yep.
But I'm actually looking forward to. I like the setup that we're working on, which is not integrated. So just even being able to make those little choices, it's kind of fun.
Yeah, so we got you just a bare frame because, one, we had a lot of parts being a shop, and we had made some customizations to the Bold, so those sort of customizations are coming off, and that's going back to stock.
Yeah.
One of them was a set of wheels I had built for you, and then I also wanted to, whenever we get a new bike like this, a lot of times I want to get the latest version of a part because I need to be familiar with that part.
Right.
So we got you the new SRAM motive brakes because this is sort of a new thing. Well, SRAM has moved all of their brakes. We talked about this to mineral oil.
Yep.
They had one model in mineral oil before, but this is a whole brand new brake system. So I wanted to evaluate this. So let's put it on your bike so we can evaluate it. You have the new RockShox reverb dropper, axis dropper. And because I want to see how, that has a completely new battery location design. Let's see how that goes.
It's a little weird looking. It is a
little weird looking.
It's my first battery operated dropper. Looks a little weird, but I'm letting it go for now.
We use the new Fox fork. So the new Fox 34 SL fork.
Yep. And
that comes out of the box as 120 millimeters of travel, but that has the capability to go to 130 quite easily. So that was why I wanted to use that brand new fork to get a ride impression of that.
Yep.
And also maybe we're gonna move it to 130 for you. So we're gonna evaluate your travel usage on the fork, and then we have the ability to bump that up. Which on, say, RockShox's SID fork, which would be the other one we would use in this type of bike, that tops out at 120.
Okay.
So we would have gone to the next model up for RockShox, and that's now heavier. So that's what.
Yeah, and contrary to that, I got a bike last year, and I'm upgrading to a new bike or replacing the bike this year. We don't usually do this.
No.
I had the Genius for 5 years.
Yeah. There's a lot of shop people and shop owners who are just constantly revolving bikes or one a year, or they're just basically riding a demo out of the shop. But no, we sort of buy the bikes from ourselves and then keep them for usually quite a long time.
Yeah, I don't think people realize that too, because I do joke. I say, "Oh, I get paid, for my marketing. I get paid in bikes." No, I don't. I wrote you a check for the frame. I'll write you a check for the different parts. So it's obviously at a discount, but we then hold on to the bikes. And I've actually been asked about this by customers who say, "How come you don't get a new bike every year?" And I say, I like to think it's that we're selling quality things that we don't need to be replaced regularly. And I think it also just speaks to our own frugality.
Yeah, there's some frugality there. There's also when you have a bike you really like, you don't really have a need to change it, and you get really good in that bike, and so and every different full suspension bike rides a little differently, and you almost have to. There's little slight tweaks you have to make to your riding style every time you change a bike like that.
And I'm not that
and so it's nice just to keep that same bike.
I think it is too. You get to know the bike.
Yep.
It takes you a while to
gravel
get to know
and road. You can switch.
Yeah,
more.
absolutely. But you get to know the bike. We do customize them. It is a process to get it right, to make sure everything's right. And then the other thing is, year to year, bikes don't change that much every year. Sometimes they have big years, like when the Spark went to the internal shock. That was obviously a big change. But leading up to that, the Spark the year before and before and before, nothing had really changed except for the colors that were available. So again, no real purpose to us upgrading. So, well, I'm very excited about it. She's beautiful. I did have one of my friends said, you're not going to be one of those people that's like worried about getting her dirty or making her scratched. And I said, maybe for a couple of days, but I'll get over it. She's got a beautiful wrap that they put all over her to protect her frame.
There's some ride wrap sections,
it is a
not
mountain
everywhere.
Bike. It is meant to be. It is that first scratch will hurt.
I'm not going to tell you there's already a scratch. Oh, yeah, you already got a little chip. I don't know when you did it, but yep.
Was it when that thing popped up? We heard it. Remember? It said, we went bing, and I went, son of a. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. It's done. Let's go.
Right.
Okay. So next weekend is Everwild. We talked about that on the last episode with Jackie. And I don't know how this happened, but I got tapped to lead the fundamentals course for the women, which I'm very excited about, also nervous. But I started watching, I thought I should get a checklist together. I should watch some videos about fundamentals.
Sure.
And I was watching one from the Global Mountain Bike Network where the host was talking about getting on
I think it was Neil.
your bicycle. Sure. Neil was talking about getting on your bicycle. And he said, and then you start rolling and then you pop up your dropper and you sit down. And this hit squarely
it triggered
into a conversation. Well, it's not that it triggered me, but it was, I feel like we've been having a conversation over the last couple of weeks about droppers.
Yes, we have.
It would never occur to me to teach someone how to get on a mountain bike with a dropper post.
Right.
Even if they had a dropper post, I have never said to someone, oh, because you have a dropper post, this is how you get on. It's always the same. Maybe I say, oh, and you could also. But when I'm teaching the fundamentals of how you get on a bike, which usually starts with your saddle needs to be much higher than you think it needs to be. Mine is at my hip. And no, you can't touch while you're on your saddle. And I teach them, right? You basically push forward and then you sit down.
Right.
Push forward and sit down.
Which is no different than the road and the gravel bikes and every other bike that does not have a dropper, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, mountain bikes tend to overall be higher. So while your distance from the pedals to the seat is in the saddle is the same, the saddle above the ground is higher on a mountain bike.
It was funny. One of the racers that I was working with last weekend, we said, your saddle is not high enough. And they said, still? We put it up last week. Mm-hmm. And I showed them, I rode away and I just started gliding and I went like this with my feet. Woo!
Yeah, that you cannot touch the ground at all.
Touch the ground, not even close.
Nope.
Which I think was a surprise to them.
Yes.
Have dropper posts become required mountain bike equipment?
The short answer is yes. They are Required is a very strong word, though, right? Here is my, and this is going to be a generational thing.
Absolutely.
Right? It absolutely is. I mean,
like a generational thing.
I didn't embrace dropper posts until 2017, 2018.
When did we go to Switzerland?
2018.
2018 is that's when I got my dropper.
Yes.
And I remember watching you install it on the bike and swear at it because it just wasn't going well. And I said, stop it. I don't care.
Well, I was doing
it.
a funky cable system.
You were doing something funky.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning your mechanical skills. But that was the first time I had it. So maybe a better question is, why have dropper posts started to become almost mandatory equipment?
They really significantly help your overall position on the bike for all the different conditions.
Okay.
And again, as we're going to be coming at this from an old school type of mentality, in that you need to learn certain things before you use the new equipment. And for us, you really need to know how to ride your bike down to sense without the dropper. Okay.
Yes.
With the seat all the way up. You need to know how to go back and forth, get behind the saddle with the saddle all the way up. You know how to kind of squeeze it between your legs so you know where it is and use it almost as a leverage point with your body English. Because no matter what, there will be times where you need to do this. It's going to a sudden drop off or descent is going to catch you off guard.
Yes.
Where
you go, whoa!
You could come up over
that.
Yes, you could come up over something thinking it's a small little roll the top. You haven't put anything down. And all of a sudden, you're going down something steep. So it is really, really necessary that you learn to ride your bike without the dropper post.
Right.
And then you introduce the use of the dropper post. And I think that is the best way to be a better all-around rider.
I'm with you. I think just from a safety standpoint, because sometimes the dropper doesn't work. Sometimes you miss it, right? You go to hit the lever and you miss it and you're down already. Or to your point, you go over something.
Yes.
I think that, we're absolutely showing our Gen X roots too, as we say. Learn the fundamentals.
We also came from the time of where there was no suspension. So my first mountain bike had zero suspension. And, and then I remember getting my first suspension fork and so forth. That was a big deal. But because we learned with no suspension and then with 60 millimeters of travel and a suspension fork and with two inch tire, 26 inch wheel, 2 inch wide tires, you had to learn to be light on your feet. You had to learn to I call it ride light.
Yes.
Right? You could not just slam the bike into everything. You had to use body English. You had to unweight the bike, and you really used a lot of finesse. Yes. And so those of us who learned on that kind of stuff, we have a lot more finesse to our bike. So there's a reason we break less stuff. We never get flats. Right. Whereas if you nowadays, where people are learning with a dropper post, with full suspension off the start, they are tending to let that equipment do a lot of the heavy lifting. And so they're slamming the bike into things harder, getting more pinch flats. Right. Going down something with the seat up is going to throw them off balance and that type of thing.
Yeah, and it's a fine line between it was better back in the day because it wasn't.
Oh, it wasn't better.
It wasn't.
No.
Well, I think it's important to. I want to make sure that's coming across. The equipment is way better, and it is safer, and the trails are better, and the safety equipment is better. This is all better, and there's a little bit, I'm sure, that's going to sound grumpy of just. You shouldn't drive a car until you've learned to drive stick. And you should, kids today don't know how computers work because they never had to. I get it does feel a little bit like that. But there's also, it's just making me a little grumpy that I think, again, you should make sure you know how to get on your bicycle without the dropper post.
Yes. Yes, without the
seems
dropper
important to
post
me.
down. Mhm.
Yes, you need to be able to just get on your bicycle.
Yes.
So when this dude said, and then you pop up your dropper, I went, no! Oh. For the rest of the episode, we're going to talk about more. We have more questions for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
One thing we were talking about recently is you were saying generally all bike shop brand dual suspension mountain bikes are good. It's not like back in the day. It's pretty good. Is there anything for someone going in that differentiates for you a good mountain bike from a bad mountain bike?
It is a difficult question, and
You're welcome.
to narrow down, but there is one particular aspect, and so a lot of different mountain bike companies use very similar suspension designs,
Okay.
and a lot of that occurred actually around 2014, 2015, I believe was the time frame, when a particular linkage called the Horst link, that patent ran out.
The horse?
Yeah, yes, based on a guy's name.
Okay.
Okay, a motorcycle designer.
I was just making sure you didn't mean horse. So Horst.
No, Horst.
Horst.
And so a lot of companies were like, great, we can now use this really nice design. And they made all of their own little tweaks to it and their little changes, but it's overall based on the same design. And there are other designs out there like that. And nowadays it has gotten to the point where everybody has really fine-tuned and tweaked their suspension design. So it is a lot more difficult to get a bad full suspension mountain bike.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right?
Yep.
But they're still out there. And so the one thing for me that differentiates something that's good and bad is what I call the anti-squat. Think about climbing up a hill and you're putting a lot of power in the pedals.
Yes.
And now imagine you can now the suspension should be active, keeping the tire in contact, but imagine you feel like the bike is just bobbing up and down and up and down with each pedal stroke.
Okay.
And you just feel like, wow, this bike is just moving. And I seem to be putting a lot of effort into making this bike just bob up and down.
Okay.
That to me is where I don't like a design.
That's bad.
The anti-squat value of a design actually is a function of also the gear you're in. So and this is way too complicated to talk about here, but basically,
where would we talk about it?
The easier the gear you're in. So if you're in these big cogs in the back,
yes,
right,
because the
anti-squat value goes up, and therefore it actually resists the suspension actually resists moving.
Oh, so as it goes into an easier gear, it gets stiffer.
Essentially, yes. So there's a compromise there.
Right. That's in part so you don't lose traction, or you're not using all of your.
Well, no, it's so that the suspension isn't sort of bobbing up and down.
Yes.
And there is that fine tuning because you want the suspension to work, but you do not want it to work to bob up and down and be too active, right?
Yes.
And you want that anti-squat to be less in your harder gears because you're probably going downhill, and you want the suspension to be more active even if you're pedaling downhill because you're hitting objects and and rocks harder and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is basically for me the one thing
A bouncy bike.
A bouncy bike. Yep.
That's actually interesting. So we were looking around to get some questions for you. We'd asked some people for questions.
Mm-hmm.
That one you had actually told me about, and I wanted to hear more about.
Okay.
You were talking in the car about anti-squat and how it's a bad bike. But I was on the Mountain Bike Ladies Facebook, one of my favorites, and I found this question about bouncing around. She said, so I bounce around a lot. I got a full suspension, but I ride a hardtail. and I'm still bouncing all over the place. I think she means on the full suspension.
Okay.
I threw myself over the handlebars last week. My question is, how do I judge if there's too much air in my tires versus needing to adjust the front or rear suspension? I keep wanting to lower tire pressure, especially in the rear tire, but my boyfriend thinks maybe I should play with the suspension first. Thoughts? Suggestions?
Well, the first thing I am seeing with this question is that when she says I bounce around a lot, and
sounds like her back if she fell over the handlebars.
I don't think she means bouncing like we just talked about in terms of the bike bouncing while she's pedaling. I think it means more like the harshness and basically going up and down, like bouncing
like
literally off of roots and rocks.
Right. It sounds like her back tire in particular is bouncing a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe flung her over the front of her handlebars.
So
I don't know her, so we're just making guesses.
So this is actually a common thing that people do with full suspension bikes.
Okay.
One is there's a little misconception on what tire pressure should be, and some of that's because people will look at the sidewall of a tire and they'll say, I can go up, like it'll say, I don't know, a lot of times it'll say 25 to 45 or something like that.
Yeah.
And whereas in the minimum on a lot of these tires is actually over where you should be.
Okay.
Those sidewall numbers.
So we actually read the numbers on the side.
Yeah, those sidewall numbers, they really shouldn't be there.
Okay. Awesome.
They are there in some cases a protective measure so people don't go over a high limit that could potentially blow the tire off the rim.
Okay. Yep.
But so a lot of people will definitely overinflate their tires.
Yes.
They'll also think that, I have a full suspension bike, so the suspension should be doing all of the work, and that should make the bike really comfortable. And it is not. There is a functioning balance between your tire pressure and your suspension. And when you get the two just right, then it just feels like a magic carpet ride. It is phenomenal. But tire pressures usually go way lower than people are doing.
Well, in this instance too, and tell me if I'm wrong, it feels like it would be easier to play with the tire pressure than to play with the pressure of the rear shock.
Well, the rear shock...
just from a I can play with the tire easily. The shock, I need a shock pump.
Yes, but you're not really... Shock pressures, you don't really play... You can play around with them in a very tight band, but shock pressure is based basically on your body weight.
Right.
So you're setting the sag of the bike based on your body weight. And while you could say and this is for a lot of bikes, say 25% or say 30% if you wanted a little plusher, you're playing with a very narrow band there.
Right.
And that's really where it should be. And then there are settings on a lot of shocks and forks to play with, but those make very subtle changes.
Yeah.
So it is not like tires. And again,
so the boyfriend is wrong.
Again, when you find the right tire pressure, you're going to be now in a narrow band.
Yes.
But for a lot of people, they could be 10, 15 PSI over where they should be.
What would you say?
Which is huge.
So I'm going to repeat. The boyfriend is wrong, right? The boyfriend... I can't tell you the number of conversations I have had or threads I've had where they go along the lines of my boyfriend or my husband says, and they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, remember we had the one rider who we did a little clinic about flats and we were doing tubeless fluid, and with tubeless fluid, you want to keep it spinning to make sure the fluid does its job. Mm-hmm. And one of our riders said, my boyfriend said I should just put the hole at the bottom and let it sit with the fluid on top of it. And that's how it seals. And we both looked at her and said, no. And she said, I knew he was an idiot. So
real quick on why that is the case is because tubeless fluid tends to solidify in droplets.
Yes.
It needs to be in small particles. And the reason why it doesn't solidify in your tire, except over a long period of time, is because it's basically in a puddle on the bottom when it's sitting there. So the more of the fluid there is together, the less likely it is to solidify. So if you put the puddle over the hole, while that seems like it would work well, it can just then dribble out, and there's so much liquid, it just won't solidify. Whereas when you're spinning, you actually get less fluid, but it's now air pressure's forcing it out into small droplets, and then it solidifies.
Right. I stand by my statement that there are a lot of answers coming from boyfriends and husbands that are incorrect.
Okay.
What is a proper PSI for a mountain bike tire?
There are actually some really good calculators out there now
there are.
to use that have been updated.
Okay.
For modern tires, sizes, and so forth. So they are, and then you enter your body weight, and you enter your tire size, and you enter your rim width.
Okay.
All right. And usually some of these things are going to ask for your internal rim width, which you're like, well, I can't get that. The tire's on the bike. Right. So if you can get the external, if you can measure how wide it is on the outside of your rim, just subtract 5 and you'll be within a millimeter of your, you'll be close to your internal.
What's my pressure?
What's your pressure?
Yeah.
You are running 229 by 2.5 tires right now.
Yes.
And so you usually run very like 18, 19.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But the side of my tire says...
Oh, we should look actually.
25 to 65.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what the side of your tire says.
We'll look it up.
Yeah.
Well, that actually brings up a question from our friend Pete, who asked, what are the differences and benefits or flaws between hooked rims and hookless rims? He was wondering, in Steve's opinion, which one is the future? What is easiest to work with?
Ooh, okay. So
oof. Good job, Pete. You made him go oof.
Oof only, and all these questions seem so simple, and there's always a lot to unpack.
The funny thing is, this was your idea that we were just have them ask me some questions, and I said I thought all of these are going to be something where he goes, well, this is complicated. This is going to be a complicated answer, but here we go.
All right. So what that's referring to is on the side of the rim. All right, the bead of the tire catches on to something. Now, it has always been, for 100 years, a hooked rim, which basically means that the sides of the rim come up and then they have a little hook at the top that pulls in. So imagine that sort of grabbing the bead of the tire along the edge.
Okay.
Hookless rims are straight walls up the side. They have no little hook. They have no little bend at the top,
just
like
straight.
Hook. That they're just straight.
Finally, a word that means what it means.
Yeah. Oh, hookless. Yeah,
hookless
instead of clipless. Yes.
I got it.
Yeah. And so hookless rims.
Yes.
They are really designed for tubeless. You can run a tube if you want.
Okay.
But you have to use a tubeless tire. And many brands of rims that make hookless rims, you have to use an approved tire. Well, you run the risk of it blowing off if you don't.
When somebody asks if a rim is tubeless ready, does that mean it's hookless?
No.
So you can have hooked.
You can have
tubeless
hooked or
rim.
hookless tubeless wheels.
Okay.
So there's actually a lot going on here. So a hooked rim can be aluminum or carbon. Okay. And tubeless or clincher, basically, not compatible with tubeless tires. Okay. A hookless rim is usually carbon.
Okay.
And it is cheaper for them to manufacture that.
It's just straight.
Because it's just straight up. It is very, so the hook on a hooked rim is very small, and it takes a lot of engineering to make that strong enough. Okay.
Yep.
Let's talk about the sort of the upsides and downsides of hookless.
Okay.
So hookless rims, because they're straight walls on each side, they actually can make them, well, one, they can be a little lighter, but they also can be a little thicker while being lighter. And they're straight up. So if you have a impact, so let's say you have your tire on there and you hit a rock and you compress the tire so much that it compresses into the rim. So this is where you would get your pinch flats with you if you had an inner tube in there, right?
Yep.
You can still get pinch flats on a tubeless system because you're pressing that tire into the sides of the rim. Okay. But a hookless, because those are a little fatter and they're straighter, they tend to not pinch flat as easily. And they also are stronger straight up because, all right. And so they can also be a little bit more robust in taking big hits.
Okay.
Because they don't have as thin and as fine of a little hook at the end.
Is hookless all types of wheels? Road, gravel, and mountain?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All
So
types.
not just, we said a rock, but you could get a road
Hook. Oh, that yes.
hookless.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of brands have been going to hookless because it's cheaper for them to make.
Okay.
And because tubeless is now becoming so common.
Are the tire manufacturers keeping up with them?
They are. So the European Rim and Tire Organization. All right. So
The European Rim and Tire.
oh yeah, hold on. Let me get this straight. Let me get this correct. The European Tire and Rim Technical Organization. All right.
ETRTO.
Yes. They came out with a tubeless standard. So they wanted the rims to be a certain diameter overall, and they, within a certain manufacturing spec, because they have to be manufacturing tolerances, and then for the tire makers to sort of follow suit with something similar, so that most tubeless tires will mount to most tubeless rims more often, because otherwise it was sort of it was a crapshoot on whether they would work. They would work together well.
Tire spelled Tyre, by the way.
Yeah, right.
So now, because I do remember a couple of years ago, I feel like it was kind of a crapshoot if a tire was compatible with a rim.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. You would find some that were either very really, really hard to mount to get on, or they were actually they mounted very easily, but then they would not hold, like they wouldn't seat very well. Like they wanted to sort of pop off in one location because the tire was a little oversized and the rim was a little undersized type of situation. So you would every now and then come up with these combinations of tire and rim that just did not want to mate well.
So do you have a preference?
I do.
Okay. Are you still in the explanation phase of this?
I am a little bit in the explanation phase.
We'll get back to that.
So as we said, hookless rims have to have a tubeless tire.
Yes.
To use them with, okay? And even if you use a tube inside, inner tube inside, they also, because of there is no hook there to grab the tire, they do have an upper pressure limit or the tire can blow off. And that is, in a lot of cases, safe. Let's talk about like road for a second. That is generally around 72 psi.
Not 100, like when we were kids. And
right.
then you
120.
120.
Right?
You just kept on pumping.
And so there have been some some problems in the pro peloton where some tires have come off and so forth, and then they're like looking at, did they overinflate it? What happened there? And that type of thing. But you can easily overinflate a tubeless tire on a hookless rim.
So downside.
And so either the tire will blow off, or once I have seen the carbon, and this is a carbon rim, the lamination of the carbon blow out. There is a big push by some cycling media that basically, let's get rid of hookless. Let's just go to hooked. It is safer for all. There is no need to worry that you have an approved tire. It is just, there's very minimal risk of blowing off a tire because of pressurization. It's just safer. And so
we just saw a mountain bike race recently where the woman, the whole tire came off the back of her rim.
Well, yes, but she might have gotten a flat and then it rolled.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we can't say that
Okay.
was a reason. I mean, you and I are both using hookless rims on our mountain bike tires.
What?
Yep.
Are there some bikes where it like mountain bike it makes more sense,
Yes.
but road bike it doesn't?
So I would say on mountain bikes, I don't worry about it whatsoever. You're not
going to overinflate to 120.
Anybody on a 29er shouldn't really even be going over 25 psi.
Right.
You know, so
Okay.
the pressures are so much lower, and you know, on a mountain bike you're almost certainly tubeless nowadays.
Okay.
Because it makes just so much sense. That really hookless is there's no problem with it. If you have a hooked rim, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And actually on the hookless, especially if you're going to do carbon, then I feel like the hookless is a stronger rim to take those impacts.
Okay.
Okay.
But on the road
and gravel, there is so again, you and I are both using hookless rims on our gravel bikes. And the two of us, we never go over 40 psi. So I'm often hovering around 30 and 40 if I'm doing a lot of road. So
right.
Again, low pressures, we're never gonna flirt with higher pressure.
Gravel probably okay.
I would still say gravel absolutely okay, but I would still say there's an argument to have hooked rims there.
Okay.
And then road, yes, this is where a lot of other cycling journalists sort of feel the same way I do, is that it should just be hooked. There's no reason not to. You don't deal with pinch flats on road at all,
right?
Because you're not impacting obstacles. I suppose you could hit a nasty pothole. I have gotten a flat.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about
but,
was it Tom Pidcock?
Yeah, Tom Pidcock. Yeah.
Is he on Scott now?
He's riding Scott. Yes,
he's riding Scott right now. I just saw a video of him trying to jump his road bike onto a picnic table.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone was like, "Don't break the new bike, Tom. Don't break the new bike." He made it up there, but I was laughing because I was thinking he could get a pinch flat. You play with your bike like that. So, do you have a feeling about the future? Do you think that we're going to go totally hookless or hooked, or do you think we're going to end up in kind of a hybrid situation?
I think it's still a hybrid situation. I think all aluminum rims are going to be hooked.
Okay.
And then carbon, I think is really going to be, it is probably going to be all hookless for carbon mountain bikes. And gravel, I think is going to just go at the whim of the manufacturer.
Okay.
And because it's cheaper to make, it could just end up hooked.
Okay.
And then for road,
wait, no, you said hookless was cheaper to make.
I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
So hookless is cheaper to make. Okay. So I think that the manufacturers, it may all in gravel just end up going to hookless. For carbon. And for road, a lot of big names are making hookless rims. Yes. Zip and Envy, to name a couple there. And it's just, however, I think that has to go back to hooked.
That's something that like the UCI would decide.
And it wouldn't surprise me if they decided to do that, or the ETRTO. Yeah.
Yes.
If they decided, you know what, this isn't working for road, and they made a standard that had to be hooked for road.
Yeah, I could see the UCI deciding that just from a safety standpoint, just like you can't do certain kind of tucks, you can't do the super tuck, right? You can't do that thing. You can't use certain equipment. I think it wouldn't surprise me if they decide that kind of. So for Pete, we've explained the differences. I think we've explained the benefits. We've just said that the opinion of the future is meh. And is one easier to work with than the other?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yep. I would say that sometimes on a hooked rim with tubeless, it can be a little harder to pop the rim off, which just in a way shows you that the interface between the tire and the rim is a little tighter and stronger.
Is it harder to get the tubeless on a rim hookless? Is it harder to set up a hookless rim the first time since there's nothing for it to just hook in? It's just magic. It just works.
Yeah. I would say there can be complications and problems with all the variations. It's not easier or harder than the other.
All right. I have another question from my mountain bike ladies. Question for anyone who has gotten shorter cranks to help with knee pain. Did you also get a smaller chain ring? I'm thinking of going from 170 millimeter to 160 millimeter cranks, but don't know if I should get 32T or get 30T. So she's talking about the cranks on the...
Yep.
I guess I didn't realize you could do that. So you can get different size cranks.
Oh, you didn't know that?
No.
Oh, okay.
I didn't.
Yes. So the crank arms,
they came the size they came,
which is basically a measurement from the center of your bottom bracket, your center of your rotating axle on the crank, to the center of your pedal axle. Okay, so that's sort of the leverage of your arm of your crank.
Okay,
and they come in different sizes depending on the type and the brand and so forth. It's either in 5 millimeter increments, or there might be a section where it's in 2.5 millimeter increments.
Okay.
She was thinking she goes down to from 170 to 160, which 10 millimeters is a big jump.
Okay.
And she also was thinking about going from a 32 tooth to a 30 tooth chain ring on her front. So she is going to make her easiest gear easier. And she's also going to make her hardest gear a little easier, which means she can't go quite as fast at the same cadence.
Okay.
Now, on a mountain bike, because that's what she's talking about here, almost all mountain bikers do not use their hardest gear to the full speed extent that it can go.
Right.
So it's usually not a problem. So by shortening her crank, she's losing that fulcrum leverage ratio.
Yeah.
Right? So... there's a thought where if her easiest gear right now, it's just easy enough to say get up the hardest hill she commonly goes up, right? Since she's losing a little bit of that leverage ratio, she might need a little easier gear, in which case that 30 tooth chain ring change will give her that.
Okay. And the reason she's changing the shorter cranks, she said, to help with knee pain. So that's changing the angle that her knee is.
It is. It's basically at the top of the pedal stroke. Now you can think of is that your knee is not coming up as high, and you're not your leg isn't bending as far.
I mean, is that the primary benefit, that when she's shortening it, so her leg isn't going to bend as much at the top of the stroke? And it's not going to reach out as far at the front of the stroke. And so that change might help her knee pain.
Yeah, and also a lot of people do it for their hips as well, because you're not flexing the hips as much.
I'm always fascinated by the amount of little changes. I know you said like 10 millimeters is a lot. And it is, but it's teeny. And it's amazing to me how much of a difference that can make. You know, I say I've become quite the princess in the Pete, because you will move something. Like I know right now with my new mountain bike, the cockpit's not quite right because my thumb was having a little bit of pain. So we'll move something, and I know you're going to move it like,
right,
and it'll be better.
Right.
Or on my road bike, I would be riding and my saddle's a little too high, and you go boop, boop. Oh, it's better.
Yes.
Perfect. It's so fascinating to me how those little changes and how many things you can tweak. Even just that you can move a saddle back and forth on the rails.
Mm-hmm. Which should not be used for the reach of the bars, by the way.
Okay.
Yes. Some people do that. They go, I feel like I need to be closer to my handlebars, so they'll move their saddle forward.
Oh, no. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. It's just to me that but even that the stem, that a lot of, I'm just going to give a smaller stem,
Mm-hmm.
or a longer stem. Like yesterday on our ride where you said,
Yeah, we were evaluating your reach to determine if the stem we were using in testing was the right length.
Right. And you said, are you, it's too much reach. And the stem is already tiny. And you said, no, there's a shorter one. And I thought
there's two shorter ones.
Great.
Actually, yeah.
But it's great that it's those little things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't even realize, like we decided my reach right now is almost the same as yours on this new bike. So maybe, even though I'm comfortable, maybe we try to see if I would be more comfortable with it slightly shorter, because I am slightly shorter than you. So it's a little funny that we have the same reach. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, we're only
really interesting.
3 inches different in height and very similar
torso, I think.
torsos.
Yeah, but it's just interesting. Again, I find it fascinating at the shop to see the little tweaks.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the cleat on your shoe, and I'm going to move it.
Oh, yeah,
boop,
that can make a huge difference. You're
boop,
right. Mm-hmm.
And better. I think it's fascinating. From our teammate and friend Nancy, she said, I have and get a lot of questions on gear ratios and frame limitations. Specifically, what combinations work best for fast/flat versus climbing, and how/what riders consider to optimize for both, and how frame geometry plays a role, especially in gravel. Can every bike take every cassette?
For the most part, we're going to exclude the new SRAM transmission drivetrains because you need a specific
Yes.
UDH hanger frame design for that.
Okay.
But otherwise, you can put almost any gear ratio you want on any frame.
Really?
It really is. It's not the frame that's dictating that. It's the parts you're putting on.
Okay.
Yep. There's a little bit of limitation in that theoretically, well, not theoretically, literally, that a lot of component companies have a minimum chainstay length for some of their parts.
Okay.
And that's just so they have enough gap between their crank and their cassettes and so forth.
Okay.
And so there would potentially be some conflicts there that you could also push the limits of in some cases, but
right.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I think some of this maybe is just about what's the right combination. How do you decide what the right combination is for how you're going to ride a bike? So you built a lovely green Scott gravel bike for our friend Alex, and she rides a lot of flat stuff. And so she got 2 in the front.
Yes.
More of a, we'll call road configuration.
Mm-hmm.
My gravel bike, I went to a very, very climby gravel thing, and I came home and I said, I just needed just one more. And then you put the SRAM Eagle cassette on mine. So I can basically, that girl is built to climb, but I have compromises.
You have compromises in that you have a bigger step between each gear. Website I talked about last show, gear-calculator.com. This one can show you how fast can you go with your gear ratio.
Oh,
right?
It does?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, you top out, if you were doing 100 RPM in your cadence, I don't think you're topping out until you're 38 miles an hour.
No, and as I have often said, then I'll just slow down. I'll just stop pedaling.
You just coast.
It's okay. That's my decision on that bike.
Right.
And I love it. But it's not right for everyone. And I think that's
the flatter the terrain you ride,
Yes.
the more you're probably going to want a 2x system. So
Okay.
with a tighter cassette in the back, so that you still have that easy climbing gear, but that you also have smaller steps between each gear. Because the flatter the terrain, the more you want to, the more difficult it is to find that optimal cadence. When you just you'll get a 0.5% grade here, and you'll get a 1% grade, and then a 2% up.
Yeah.
So you sort of have these very, very shallow grades of up and down. And so finding that optimal cadence, usually you're only going to want a change of a tooth in that cog. So you want to have a 14 tooth cog, and then the next one is a 15 tooth.
Okay.
Right? Whereas if you're on a 1x with a SRAM Eagle cassette, you might have a 3 or 4 tooth jump between them.
Yep.
So you're going long, and you're like, I want it a little easier. And you shift one. Now it's a little too easy.
Yes. Yep,
So like
absolutely.
on the rail trail, for instance, on my particular setup, and with my particular body and how I ride, I find myself going back and forth between these two gears. Because one is a little too hard and one's a little too easy. So
I agree. That is the compromise that I
but
see
the
on mine
more
too.
rolling the terrain, the more you're going to be frequently changing gears, and you just tend to notice the issue less.
Yeah.
Right. So here in New England, which is constant rolling terrain, which is why most people are choose 1x around here.
Where we had a friend visit years ago, and she lives in the Midwest. She said, I never shift, ever. Just travel,
Right.
She would be training for triathlons, and she said, I can go days without shifting. And I just because it's all flat, and I think I shift like it's going out of style.
Yeah.
I'm very rarely just in one gear for any extended
I should
period.
look because with the electronic shifting, it keeps track of the number of shifts.
Does
But
it?
now I'll have to look for a gravel ride. I know on a mountain bike ride, like a 10-mile mountain bike ride, I could shift 600 times.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that.
So
So again, it's just cool because there's no one size fits all.
yep.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this up. Cycling Together with Kristin and Steve is a production of Steve the Bike Guy, an independent bike shop in Eastern Massachusetts, and Sundin Marketing.
If you like this show, please leave a review or share with a friend. And for show notes, links, or to leave a comment, question, or topic suggestion, visit cyclingtogether.bike. And you can follow the shop on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.
You can also see some snippets we pull out from these shows into what I call STBG sprints.
Mm-hmm.
They're reels and shorts. Nobody needs to see your shorts, so they're sprints on YouTube and Instagram. Thank you for joining the ride.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Okay.
And you almost would think, well, there's nothing to keep the tire in. How's this going to work?
Hopes and dreams.
Right.
Prayers and...
My tire's just going to blow off.